Thank you guys so much for coming. We're very excited to have you here. I'm Tilly. I'm the workshop coordinator for ASURE, and we also have with us today Julissa. She's one of our fantastic peer mentors. And today we're going to talk about how to get involved in research. So by the end of this workshop, you're going to be able to understand the types of undergraduate research experiences available to you. You'll know how to pursue those research experiences and to know how to build relationships with professors, which is really important when you're looking to get involved in research with finding RA and volunteer positions, but also forming a mentoring relationship to find a thesis advisor if you're looking to do independent research. The University of Oregon is a fantastic place to do undergraduate research. It's one of the top 34 public research universities in the US. And over 80% of undergrads participate in some form of research during their time here. That's a really impressive number. And it means that if you're looking to get involved in research, odds are you're going to be able to find an opportunity, and you may even be able to have more than one opportunity. I have had more than one opportunity research experience, and it's really great if you can do that. It also means that you don't have to feel like you're competing for your with your classmates and your roommates for these positions. There's just there's enough to go around. There's plenty to go around. And at the U of O, research happens in every discipline, whether you're a music major or a linguistics major like me, or a biology major. There's research going on in your major, and you can participate in it, and you should participate in it. If you're not sure about the research opportunities going on in your field, a great place to start is by checking out your department website, or UROP, one of the undergraduate research organizations on the campus, gives an overview of kind of what happens in a bunch of disciplines at this link, and I'll share the PDF for the slides at the end of the workshop, so you guys can access that. It's really important to know that it's never too late and it's never too early to get involved in research. Whether you're a freshman or you're in your senior year, there's someone who's going to be really happy to work with you, and you're going to have a great experience with a professor. So there are so many reasons to get involved in research. You learn so much about your area of interest in the research process, but you also learn so many versatile skills like critical thinking, working on a team, and those skills are really important no matter what you decide to do beyond college. I've learned tons of things by doing research that I didn't even think that I would learn. For example, my lab, it's a linguistics lab. We were last year, me and another RA spearheaded putting together a museum exhibit to showcase linguistic diversity. And we were responsible for gathering data, which means we would bring people into the lab and we would record phrases from their language. And so we had to write a protocol to do that, which is a set of instructions. And it seems like it's easy to write a set of instructions, but it's actually kind of difficult when you're working in an official lab environment and with speakers and naturalistic speech. And so there are tons of skills like that that I've learned and that you can acquire from doing all kinds of research. Research helps you build personal and professional connections, and it also helps you build mentoring relationships. Mentoring relationships are really important, not just when you're looking for someone to give you a letter of recommendation or a reference, but mentors are a core part of your support system at college. And they're awesome when you go to do your independent research. You have to identify a faculty mentor. And of course, doing research is also great to build your resume, but that's not the prime reason that you should do research. There's so many other reasons, and perhaps the most important reason to do research is because it gives you a chance to explore. It gives you a chance to explore your interests that might become passions. And I really encourage you to explore a different discipline. And doing that will give you a real sense of what you want to do with the rest of your college career and after college. I know this from personal experience. I came into the University of Oregon a biology major. I took a class called Language and Power my first term with the professor that is now my thesis advisor. And because of the research experiences that I've had with her, I changed my major to linguistics, and it's just been such a great experience. So I really encourage you to look outside your major when you're thinking about getting involved. So we know that if you're exploring other fields and opportunities in your interests, you're going to be saying yes to a lot of new opportunities. And I think that's really important. Once you're in a lab, and even before you get to a lab, being open to where the research takes you is really great. When I entered college, if you told me that I would be working with speakers and not beakers in the lab, I would have been very surprised. I definitely thought I was going to work in a biology lab. But it just goes to show you what can happen if you open your mind and just look around. So there are two main types of undergraduate research experiences. The first is student-led, which is when you do your own research with the support and help of a faculty member. This is also known as an honors thesis. The second type of research experience you can have is a faculty-led research experience, which is when you help a lab or a faculty member with the project that they already have going. And so even though these two experiences kind of seem like separate things, I want you to think of them as part of the same machine, because the skills that you learn when you're doing your faculty-led research experience are going to help you immensely when you go to do your student-led research experience. In fact, I'm not the only one that thinks this. Whether you're thinking about doing an honors thesis or not, Clark Honors College recommends getting involved in research during your first or second year. I think that's great advice for anyone. And so when I went to do my thesis project, I had been involved in undergraduate research for years, since my freshman year, and I already had such a great knowledge base, so I could focus on doing the research instead of learning to do the research. I had already learned how to run subjects, which is when in the psychology and linguistics field, we study how the human mind processes language and other things. And so we ask participants to come into the lab and participate in experiments. Usually for linguistics, this involves people listening to sounds and asking and answering questions on a computer. And I knew how to administrate the whole process, how to get people in the lab and get them to participate in the experiment, get consent from them and everything. I had also participated in a lot of pilots in the lab. Pilots are when people test out their experiments with their peers. So in the lab, when a grad student is looking to run a new experiment, they ask people in the lab, including undergrads, to test the experiment out as if they were a participant. And I did every pilot I could, and it was a great learning experience. So by the time I went to go do my thesis, I knew what worked best as a participant, and how to fix problems, like if a sound file isn't playing correctly or there's a glitch in the code. And those things really helped me when I went to do my thesis. So there are two types of faculty-led research positions. First, you can be a paid employee in the lab. This was referred to as an RA. So there are two types of RAs in college. There's the research RAs and there's the RA in the dorms. And we're talking about the research RAs in the lab. As an RA and as a volunteer, volunteers are people who don't get paid in the lab, but they're still part of the lab, and they have similar responsibilities to RAs. Both RAs and volunteers help faculty with research. This could be any part of the research process that the faculty needs help with. It could be collecting data, it could be analyzing data, writing up results. And the time commitment for RA positions is usually about 10 to 20 hours a week. Volunteer position hours are generally more flexible, and volunteer positions are a great opportunity for you to get to know the faculty member before committing to a paid position. And volunteer positions are generally easier to get than RA positions because RA positions are often project-based and they're dependent on the amount of funding that a professor has at a given point in time. So let me break that down a little bit. Professors get money to do research by asking a funding agency. There are tons of funding agencies. There's the NSF, there's the NIH, there's a ton. They ask them for a specific amount of money to investigate a specific research question, and then they use part of the money that they get from that funding agency to hire help in the form of RAs. And so a professor's ability to hire you is dependent on how much grant money they have at a given point in time. And with volunteer positions, that's not the case. It's really important to know that volunteer positions often turn into paid RA positions. I know this from personal experience. I started as a volunteer in my lab, and after about a term, it was a paid position. Because when professors get new grant money, when they get new funding and they want to hire RAs, the first people they're going to want to hire are volunteers in the lab that have been really dedicated and have shown a great work ethic and experience, and are a really good fit with the lab. So I want to talk about the structure of a lab a little bit. So every lab has a principal investigator or a PI. That means the professor that runs the lab. So you might hear someone say the PI of the lab. That just means the professor that's in charge. Labs almost always have a lab manager as well. Lab managers handle the the administrative tasks that the PI doesn't have time to handle. Like if you have really expensive equipment, the lab manager maintains that equipment, they keep lab documents up to date, and they keep everything running and organized in the lab. Labs also have graduate students, and sometimes they have postdoc researchers. Postdoc researchers are people that have already earned their PhD, but they're working in the lab, usually on a grant that the principal investigator has. And to get some more research experience, and they usually go out and apply for jobs after the postdoc experience. And of course, you have undergrads in the lab. Undergrads are a really central part of every lab. And undergrads can have 3 roles. You can be an RA, you can be a volunteer, or you can be an honors thesis student. And so it's really important to think of the lab not just as a place where you work, but as a community. I think that when I was coming up with my thesis idea and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I gonna research? I really felt like the people in this cartoon. But the lab has been a really supportive environment. And if you're feeling that way about coming up with topics for independent research, or you're not sure what you're interested in researching, the lab helps you with things like that. For example, we have weekly lab meetings in my lab. We talk about projects that grad students have going, and we can give them feedback on their projects if they ask for help from us in solving a particular problem. That's a huge focus of our lab meetings. We also do some professional development stuff where we talk about like how to apply for jobs or prepping for interviews. And so there's also a relationship between everyone in the lab. It's not really hierarchical in my lab, and I think in most labs. And you're not just getting help from the principal investigator that we talked about in the previous slide, the professor that's in charge, but you have this whole community of grad students and undergrads as well. I can't tell you the number of times I have gotten advice and help from grad students in the lab. And once I know enough, now I'm in my 4th year, I'm doing my honors thesis. The grad students that are more new in the lab and the undergrads that are more new in the lab, they ask me for questions, they ask me questions and for help with certain things. And so it's this community of people who are interested in research, and we're sharing knowledge with each other. So when you're thinking about applying for RA positions, if you're looking to apply for RA positions for the next term, so if it's fall term right now, if I want to get a position for winter term, I should start looking about halfway through fall term, about week 5. We're in prime RA position searching time right now. If I'm looking to get involved in research over the summer, have a summer research experience, I should start looking much earlier. I would say the beginning of winter term, and throughout winter term and into spring term, summer positions are more competitive simply because there's less of them. But if you can have a summer research experience, that's awesome. 2 of my summers in my college experience have been full-time research positions in the lab, and full-time summer positions. They're a great, you just learn so much during that summer when you're working on a project full-time, and you get really enmeshed in the project and you learn about the research process and everything. And so it's a great experience if you can have it. Does anybody have any questions at this point? You can either just shout them out or put them in the chat. We'll pause for questions at the end too.
Are you going to cover where to go to get involved in the research opportunities and like where to access them at?
Absolutely, we're going to talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to talk about how to contact professors and everything.
Okay.
I have a quick question. So how do you know, like, how can you gauge how much free time you have, like, on top of classes? And also, like, how do you approach a PI and be like, hi, like, I have X amount of time. How much time would, like, your lab kind of, like, require? Just how to, like, navigate that?
That's a great question. And first, we're going to talk about how to contact a professor and establish a relationship in the next few slides. But in terms of time commitments and negotiating time commitments, RA positions are generally flexible in that you do have to commit 10 to 20 hours a week, depending on the needs of the faculty member. But the hours are pretty flexible in terms of when you actually do that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay, then I'm going to move along. If you have any questions, we'll talk about them at the end and you can put them in the chat, and we'll address them after slides. Okay, so building relationships with professors is the best and most reliable way to get involved in research, so it's a really important skill to acquire. Unfortunately, there is no Tinder that matches students who want to do research with professors that are looking to do research with students. And so the best way to get involved is to contact and build relationships with professors. When you're reaching out to professors, you first want to think of professors that you've taken classes with. Clark Honors College says, and it is absolutely true, the best advising relationships begin in the classroom. I can tell you from personal experience, I have had 2 research experiences, and both of them started with taking a class with a professor that I resonated with, and the subject matter was really interesting in those classes. Other ways to get involved is to go to office hours and to send an email to a professor. You can go to the office hours and send an email to a professor you know and a professor that you don't know. And we're going to talk about how to do that right now. So first, let's talk about going to office hours. I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard professors say, my office hours are lonely, nobody shows up, please come and talk to me. I really want to come, I really want to talk to the students. So office hours can be intimidating, but it's important to remember that your professors are just people, and the vast majority of your professors became professors because they genuinely enjoy interacting with students. And so take the leap and go to office hours, whether they're over Zoom or in person. Your professors are going to be happy to talk to you and see your smiling face. So there are a few things that you can do to prepare for office hours. The first is do your research on the professor and their research interests. I recommend Googling your professor, like not in a creepy way, but more in the way that you would Google a potential employer. When you're Googling your professor, you're looking for two primary things. First, the lab website, and second, academic papers that the professor has written. If you can find the lab website, that's gold. It tells you so much about the professor and their research interests. It usually has a list of projects they have going. It tells you about the lab size. There's usually a list of personnel. And so what some websites might also advertise RA positions. You might know if they're looking or not based on looking at their website. When you're looking for academics papers that the professor has written, you don't need to read every word of every paper the professor has ever written. You just need to read enough to get a sense of what the research interests are. And if you don't know where to start with reading academic papers, just start with reading the abstract. The abstract is the summary of the paper. It usually appears in the very first paragraph. And it's usually enough to give you a good working knowledge. So by the end of your Googling, you should be able to articulate what the professor's research interests are and why you find them interesting. So you should come to office hours with, I think, 1 to 3 questions. They can be from your investigative Googling, or if you're taking a class with the professor, they can be questions that you have about the class, something that you really thought was interesting and you want to talk about more. I recommend writing your questions down in a notebook and bringing the notebook and something to write with to office hours. The goal in office hours is to establish a conversation and get a conversation going, get to know the professor, and it's much easier to do that if you kind of go in knowing what you're going to talk about. Of course, when you're going to office hours, be friendly, display genuine interest, and I recommend coming early during office hours. It's generally easier to talk to the professor in the first half of office hours. And if you're looking to connect with professors that you don't know, you can absolutely go to their office hours. Their office hours are usually listed on their UO bio page, which you can also find from investigatively Googling your professor. And if for some reason their UO bio page does not list their office hours, you can send them an email. And if you don't know if your questions are good after investigatively Googling your professor, or if you need help doing that, come see one of our peer mentors like Julissa, and they'd be happy to help you out with that. I can tell you from going to office hours for me has been really great. One of my research experiences, I got to know my professor through office hours, and I think I was being interviewed for the research position that she had opened without even knowing it. And so it's a great opportunity. Okay, so now we're going to talk about sending an email. You want to strike a balance with sending an email between the photo on the left and the photo on the right. You want to have the confidence that the photo on the left has, but you want to put the same thought and politeness into the photo on the right. And emails are one of the easiest ways to make a good first impression. And so we're going to talk about how to do that. So Puddles has decided he's been spending a lot of time in the sports arenas, but he'd like to spend some more time in the lab. So he has identified a professor that he is interested in working with. Her name is Geraldine Richmond. She is in the chemistry department. This is a real person. So Puddles' email is, "Hey Geraldine, my name is Puddles. I'm at the UO. What are you currently researching? I'm available Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12 to 4 and Mondays and Wednesdays from 10 to 2. Puddles the Oregon Duck." How can this email be improved? What do you think Puddles can do to improve this email? You can either put it in the chat or just shout it out.
I wouldn't ask what they're researching. I would do my research and then like kind of describe how like I kind of know what's up with the research and stuff like that.
Excellent point. Exactly. After your investigative Googling, you should be able to do that. Awesome. I think there's some.
I would also ask more about their availability rather than stating your own.
Yes, that's a great point. Exactly. Making it easier for them to meet up with you instead of the other way around. Let's see, we have some stuff in the comments. And show more genuine interest, yes, by showing that you've researched the professor. More formal writing style, absolutely. And I think one of the ways that the writing style could be improved to be more formal is using a greeting other than hey, and using a title for the professor. Is there anything else that you guys see in this email?
I think perhaps providing more information as to yourself and like what your major is.
Exactly. Yeah, you should give a little bit of information about yourself and why you're interested. You guys are pros at this. You covered all my points, actually. Actually, I think the only thing we didn't cover is ending the email. When you're ending the email, this goes back to what you guys mentioned about tone and formality. End the email with thank you. That's always a great sign off. It's one that I use all the time. No one's going to get offended with thank you. And if you're looking for a good resource to just generally write a polite email to a professor, this article here from Medium is great. And there's another link to a sample email to faculty from URA that you can check out too. So Puddles has incorporated your excellent feedback, and he now has an appropriate greeting, and he uses the professor's title. He gives a little information about himself, and he gives a little relevant coursework. Puddles expresses why he's interested in the research, and he shows that he's researched the professor. And Puddles makes it easy for the professor to set up a time to meet with him, and he offers to come to office hours. That's always a great thing. Say, can I stop by your office hours? That's really easy for the professor. And Puddles ends with a great sign off. And he ends with, I look forward to hearing back from you and thank you. And I also want to add, our peer mentors are awesome resources for you guys to go to for advice and help with writing an email. Julissa is one of our emailing pros. I think Julissa will talk about that later, but yeah, she can definitely help you out with sending an email, even if it's an email that to a professor that you don't know. So other ways to search for research positions: listen to housekeeping announcements during class. Professors often announce if they're looking for RAs or if other people in the department are looking for RAs at a given point in time. Also, keep an eye on your department's listserv. That's a really prominent place where professors advertise RA positions. And you can also stop by or email your department's office, the person in charge of the department's office, usually the office manager. They usually know who's looking in the department, and they can point you towards some resources in the department as well. Some, but not all RA job ads are posted on URUP's site here at this link. Again, I'll give you guys the PDF of the slides in the chat after we're done. So that's worth checking out for sure. And it's also worth checking out Handshake, UO Handshake. If you're not familiar with Handshake, you can learn about it at this link. Not a huge amount of research positions are posted on Handshake, but some are. And so check out Handshake, filter by on campus. That should still work in the coronavirus times. And again, I really encourage you to consider applying for positions outside your major. It increases the pool of opportunities you have exponentially. And looking outside your major, it also makes you a more interesting candidate, even if you decide you don't want to go with the field that you've decided you're interested in researching. For example, you know, if you have a chemistry student who's studying music theory, that's really interesting, and that's something employers and grad students and grad schools might be really interested in hearing about. So when you start an RA or volunteer position, you've done all the things you've talked about. You've emailed, you've gone to office hours, you've researched your professor, and you've gotten an RA or volunteer position. Congratulations. First, say thank you, of course, and then you should ask how you can get started. Most positions require training, and you should complete that training promptly if possible, unless the professor says you have to wait until the training is offered, or I have to give it to you at this certain point of time. As long as you can do the training by yourself, it should be pretty high on your to-do list. It shows the professor that you're appreciative of the opportunity and that you're going to be a productive member of the lab. If you got a paid position, you should also ask how you will be paid and who you should go to with questions regarding payment. I know it seems kind of rude to be like, hey professor, where's the cash after you've just gotten an RA position? But it's just easier for you, professor, and it's a good thing to do in the long run, because your professor is not always the one who handles your payments. It's usually someone in the department's office. And you should ask how you will be paid, because there are generally 2 ways to be paid: hourly or stipend. If you're on hourly, that means you fill out timesheets and you get multiple chunks of money at multiple points throughout the term. If you're on stipend, it means you get one chunk of money one time during the term. And so it's important to be clear with your PI about how you're going to be paid and whether you need to fill out timesheets and where they should go and everything. And it's also important to note that if you're working on a grant and there's multiple RAs working on the grant, you might not be paid the same way as the other person working on the grant with you. So when you go to fund your independent research after you've done some faculty-led research, the U of O has some great funding opportunities. The main places to look for those funding opportunities are ASURE and UREP. ASURE is awesome. ASURE is actually associated with CURE. They have a ton of research experiences, and they have a research experience called FIRE that's special for first-year students. UREP is also an awesome place to look for independent research funding. They have a number of fellowships. I was lucky enough to receive a fellowship from UREP over the summer, and it was a fantastic experience. Not only did I get some money to do my own independent research, I had a cohort of fellows, other people who had received the fellowship, and I got to know these people, and we had weekly meetings that helped us do our research, and we talked about a bunch of professional development things and how to maximize your college experience and life after college. So it's a great opportunity if you can get. I really recommend applying for those. There's also external funding. That's funding that does not come from the University of Oregon, does not come from university sources. And where you can look for external funding highly depends on your field. The best person to ask about external funding is your faculty mentor. And you can see some research experiences funding for your independent research at this link here. But you should really ask your thesis advisor. They'll have a lot of great pointers. It's really important to note that undergraduate research funding almost always requires at least a signature from your faculty mentor, usually more, usually a letter of recommendation. And so it's important that you've identified a faculty mentor before you think about doing your thesis and applying for funding for your independent research. And especially because they're going to be able to walk you through that process as well. So other resources that you can go to, you can always go to ASURE, that's us, affiliated students for undergraduate research and engagement, and for help with getting involved in research, and every part of your research journey we can help you with, and Julis is going to talk about the peer mentoring program in a minute, which is a core part of what we do. You can also go to the UREP, aka the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program. It's at this link. And you can go to CURE, the Center for Undergraduate Research and Engagement. And so I'm going to turn it over to Julissa.
All right. Hi, everyone. So basically what ASURE is that it's the one-stop shop for students to find research advice, resources, and opportunities. And that was definitely evident, hopefully, in the PowerPoint you've just seen. So basically, we're ran by student researchers or those who have participated in research, like myself. And we're here for you. We're here to guide you and help you on your way to become a student researcher. And so all of our ASURE peer mentors and the organization itself is not ran by one group of students. We're all from different majors, and that's to facilitate a well-rounded experience for each and every one of you, because not only is research only for the STEM field, but it's also for, you know, any field that you could think of is definitely, there's research, you just have to find it, and we're here to help you. One of our main services that we offer, besides the workshops throughout the term, the classroom visits, and peer mentoring, the biggest one that we offer is the Undergraduate Research Symposium that's offered in the spring term. And we actually did it in the spring term of 2020 when the U of O went completely virtual. And it was extremely just, all of a sudden the UO went virtual. So the committee had to improvise. And I wasn't part of ASURE, but it was a phenomenal experience to be part of the research symposium as an undergrad researcher, because I participated in it with my colleague. And so we basically had a virtual research symposium. And so now this year, I'm not sure, I'm assuming it'll be virtual, but that's
We're still
the biggest,
having it. I'm not sure if it's going to be virtual or not. So
Mhm.
go ahead.
Yeah, so that's the biggest, most publicized event that ASURE holds.
Yeah, and I also want to say about the Undergraduate Research Symposium, you don't have to be like done with your thesis research to participate in it. I participated in the Undergraduate Research Symposium in 2020, this year, and I was presenting research with the team of RAs that I work with in my lab, and it was from data, that from the grant that I had been working on for 2 years that my PI has.
Yeah, the research symposium is definitely an opportunity to just get your research and your hard work out there, to just show everyone what you've done. And, you know, it's one of those proud moments that you could definitely have as an undergraduate. And so it's more like, it's more like, here's my research. It's not like a judge or anything. So it's a good experience. So these are our virtual open hours. On the left column is the ASURE peer mentors. And then on the bottom right, that's me. And so the three of us are undergraduate researchers, or those who have been in labs. And so we're students, but the middle, Carl, Reasoner, Lewis, and Holly, and Lanch are faculty advisors. So that offers a different perspective for you all. If you would like to discuss just in a different perspective, we all are trained in the same way.
Yeah, and I also want to add Carl and Lanch are fantastic. Lanch helps us run ASURE, and Carl led our cohort of fellows over the summer, and he's fantastic as well. And so now we would love to take discussion. We'd love to discuss any questions that you guys might have and answer your questions. And Julissa and I will also share a little bit more about our research experiences, so you can get some more information from us about what it's really like to be involved in research. And I also just want to put this cartoon up while we're doing it, because I like this cartoon. And so let's open the floor to questions. So we have a question in the chat. Can you put your email? Oh, yes. In the chat, so we can contact you later if we need more input. Yeah, so you'll have access to the PowerPoint and everything. And if you need any help with this, go ahead and contact us. And have you been doing research during the terms? If so, how much time does it take? Absolutely. Julissa, do you want to start with answering this one?
Sure, yeah. So I participated in my lab for an entire year, and it was from June 2019 to June 2020. And I was a volunteer, so I was not paid, and my hours were definitely more flexible than my colleagues that were paid. And I basically had a full load of classes, so I made sure to only do about 6 to 8 hours per week of volunteer research, and even virtual 6 to 8 hours. So it was definitely manageable with the full load. And Tilly?
Yeah, so I have done research, I think, almost every term since I entered the U of O. And it takes about, I'd say about 15 to 20 hours a week if you're an RA. And it's about finding the rhythm of where that time fits in with your schedule. I've been able to manage it. You know, it kind of just, it's a pretty flexible, in terms of when you do the research, there's not like you have to clock in and clock out in most positions. So it's pretty easy to find a groove, and it doesn't really feel like, I mean, it's work, but it doesn't really feel like you're crushing with this whole participating in research. It's really, because it adds to your academic experience. It doesn't really feel like difficult, laborious work. Yeah.
I'd like to also point out that I'm not sure how it is for paid positions, but for volunteer positions, such as mine, I was able to go I was able to modify my hours per term. So in the beginning, I had a lot of time on my hands. So I joined in the summer, so I was able to go and basically be a part-time researcher. A full-time researcher. And then when the fall term hit, I just talked to my PI and we decreased my hours. But I'm not sure if that's the same for paid positions.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Julissa. Yeah. Do you guys have other questions right now?
I have another couple questions really quick. So my first question is, like, a PI that I'm interested in that I am taking a class from right now, her lab is like kind of new-ish, and she has like 3 grad students in it. And so my question is, how do you know if a PI is willing to take on undergrads, and is it like kind of abrasive to like ask if they would take you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Julissa, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I personally don't think it's abrasive at all. I think PIs are here for us as well as we're here for them. So it's a give and take. And I think that if you showed your genuine interest in your PI's lab and your PI's work, then I don't think that they would turn you away. Now, regarding grants and funds for a research position that's paid, that might be a different story. But like Tilly has explained, you could potentially state that you're interested in a volunteer position, if you are, and go from there regarding your time commitments and their availability for you.
Yeah, thank you, Julissa. That's such an awesome answer. And I'd like to add that Lanch says that, you know, it's the point when you email a professor, it's more opening the window to more opportunities. So instead of asking like right out, are you willing to take on undergrads right now? Are you hiring? It's better to use language like, can I talk to you to talk about, can I come to your office hours to talk about your research and explore potential opportunities?
Well, thank you so much.
Of course. Any other questions?
So I just tried Googling for one of my professor's bio pages, and I'm not able to find it. Is there a particular place I should go to find it, or maybe I'm Googling for the wrong thing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's not always super easy to find the bio page, but I think that's something that Julissa and our other peer mentors would be super happy to help you with, finding the bio page in your professor's website. And it's not like a huge thing to sweat if you can't find the bio page right away. Julissa, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, if you're on the department website, if they don't have a lab that's currently published, it might not be there. I usually just research the person's full name, and then whatever Google results give me, as long as it's from the U of O, it'll lead me to their bio page. Yeah. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I tried doing that, so maybe she just doesn't have a lab there posted or something. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And we have a question in the chat. does applying for research positions that don't relate to your major put you at a disadvantage to getting those positions? What do you think, Jalissa?
Not at all. I'm a human physiology major, and I've been one since I was a freshman, and now I'm a senior. And so when I applied for my lab, I didn't go to office hours for my PI because I genuinely didn't know that was kind of the thing to do. I wasn't in ASURE at the point. So I just emailed the professor that I was interested in regarding his work. And I showed genuine interest, and he emailed me back. And I began my research there in his neurobio lab, which is a biology lab. And I definitely didn't expect to work in a lab that was a biology lab because that's not my major. And I didn't think that I had the requirements for it, but he definitely assured me that as an undergraduate, you're expected to do A, B, and C, and maybe D. But like, if you feel uncomfortable, if you don't have any clue what you're doing, they will train you because they want you. So.
Yeah,
Tilly?
absolutely. I think that was a great answer. And like we talked about, having more diverse experiences, it doesn't put you at a disadvantage. It definitely makes you a more interesting candidate and someone to work with too. We got a great, I also want to just talk about reaching out to professors during COVID. So COVID, I know everything's kind of upside down right now and everything, but it's okay to not know when you're going to be in Eugene. You should still reach out for these research positions. There's a lot of research going on remotely. We're having remote lab meetings. And there's a lot of stuff that you can do on the computer, like data analysis and coding and things like that. So absolutely still reach out to professors during COVID times. And I see that we have another question in the chat. Julissa, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. So when I was in my research lab, I did not do an individual research thesis. But however, I did research how to do those. And from my experience, at least in the STEM labs that I was in, you're not able to apply for a research thesis. Like you're not able to apply for a scholarship regarding a thesis that you haven't started, because in order to apply for those scholarships, you typically need a PI to recommend you, and then you typically need some sort of position in your lab. But again, this is for the labs that I've only researched in, and that was a small STEM lab, so I'm not entirely sure if this is a general rule. Tilly, do you have any ideas?
I think that was a great answer. Yeah, I think that that's something you can come talk to the ASURE peer mentors about too. And I still want to hear you guys' questions, but I know Julissa has to leave at 4:30, so I want to make sure that we hear a little bit more about Julissa. I want to ask her some questions about her research experience. You guys can get a more concrete example of what goes on in the lab. So Julissa, what's the first task that you did for your lab?
So I worked in a neurobio lab, like I said, right? And so basically, as an undergrad researcher, I was able to, well, the first task was not technically part of the research. It was more like initiating the undergrad in there. So I had to clean dried mouse brains that the mice were our sample for a study. And I had to clean the dried mouse brains that were dried up in well plates that were used for about, they were sitting there for a solid 2 years or so. And the mice brains were in a PBS solution. And so PBS is, it simulates the body's fluids. And so when the mice brains were viable, it was able to keep the tissue samples perfect for images. But my job was to clean out those tissue samples for the new ones I was about to take as an undergrad researcher. So it was a pretty fun task. I definitely learned my way around lab during that.
I think that's like the best answer to what's the first task you did is scraping brains out of wells. It's my favorite. What are your lab meetings typically like in your lab, Julissa?
Yeah, so our lab meetings were virtual, and also before COVID they weren't. They usually take about an hour to an hour and a half. Some lab meetings, we had our postdocs or grad students discussing their research, and they also showed us little bits of presentations that they were probably doing in a different forum. And we basically had that going on, and then as well as some lab meetings were a little shorter when we just take inventory of, like, literal inventory of the lab materials, as well as inventory of what's going on with everyone. We'd go around the table and the PI would just be like, okay, so what did you do last week? And then in lab. And so basically it was kind of like just a share. And I think the other type of lab meeting we'd have is, my PI used to come to us for proofreading. And so we would basically proofread his grant proposals and other documents that he had written during the week or two. And we would just sit there and proofread. And it was really good experience because I learned more about what he was doing. And also I learned how to read grant proposals.
Yeah, and I think that when we were talking about this, our professors actually work together. They have a collaborative project, right? Yeah.
Yes. And so that's basically like a huge part of lab is like, you're in the linguistics lab, I was in a neurobio lab. The two meshed just because our PIs wanted to work within the interdisciplinary between each other. So I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, exactly. It really shows you research happens in every discipline, and interdisciplinary research is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And Julissa, what was the time you got advice or help or developed a friendship with someone who wasn't your PI?
Okay, so I know you just said who wasn't your PI, but just a heads up, I always talked with my PI. I think building that bond between them is super viable, and it's definitely doable if you're in a lab. But I actually found my best friend in lab, and he was just like another undergrad, but he was in lab a year before I was in lab, so he had more seniority. So when I joined, he was able to teach me basically like all the ropes. And so that's kind of like, there isn't like lab hierarchy, of course, but there is the seniority base and who trains who. The PI is not going to train me to scoop mice brains out. That's what Matt's job was for. So I definitely found friendships in lab.
Yeah. Grad students are a huge part of the experience, and other undergrads too. It's not just your professor. And Julissa, how did you first get involved in research and contact your PI?
Okay, so I wanted to join a lab. I knew that for sure. And I wanted to join it for the experience of joining a lab. And I wanted to see what it means to be a researcher. So I had a few options regarding the STEM field labs, and I chose the bio lab because I thought his work was extremely interesting, and it was outside my field. Like I said, I'm a human phys major, but that didn't deter me. That I felt like it added a little bit more depth in my upcoming, resume that I would be making. But also it would help me gain some more experience in the biology field. So I just basically emailed him. I found his email through the department website, and then I emailed him similar to the way Puddles emailed, the better one. And then he emailed me back, and I actually showed up to the meeting that we formed. I showed up with a notebook and a pen, and I highly advise it because it shows initiative. And I've actually seen some people take notes on their phones, and it doesn't look good. It just makes it look like you're half on your phone, half listening. But that is a thing. I've seen that. So just a heads up. Try to bring a big notebook if you can. Yeah, so I did that, and it was extremely fun to begin a lab. And at that meeting, he taught me a little bit more about the research that he was doing, and like it was basically like a mini lecture. So it was really fun.
Yeah, and you guys can see that new Julissa is like a cold contacting ninja. So if you don't know how to get involved in research and you want to cold contact a professor, Julissa can help you. She's awesome at it. Yeah. And Julissa, what's something that you've done in the lab that you didn't expect that you would like, but you did?
Oh man, I actually didn't think that I would like data analysis as much as I do. And so that's because I'm a very like tactile person. And so before you join a research lab, it's really important to know what kind of tools and methods you like to work with, and if you're a visionary person or if you're a literature person, you know. And I was a very hands-on person. And then one of my assignments was to begin an analysis project. And so I had to sit down at a computer and, you know, code. And I was like, whoa, I don't want to do that. But I did it, and I really enjoyed it. And I ended up learning new tools to take an analysis of images. And I definitely learned a lot more than I thought, and I definitely enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Jules. If you have to duck out, that's totally fine. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Julissa. And so I want to open the floor back up to questions you guys have.
I have another question. So, what kind of like remote research opportunities are available? Like, is it like a lot of like computational stuff, or like writing a review, or like just kind of what are the options?
It's a great question, and I'd say it's highly dependent on the field, but I think one thing that you can expect in every field is that there's going to be data analysis going on because people are collecting and analyzing data. So like Julissa said, maybe coding and learning to code will be a huge part of that. I know that I've had to do some data analysis and what we call data wrangling, which is what make the data easier to process for data analysis. Our lab has a license for Data Camp, which is essentially an online service where they teach you to code. And so a lot of labs do that. I know for a linguistics lab, there's a ton of stuff that you can do remotely. You can analyze speech samples with a computer program, and you listen to speech and you take measurements of the speech and you split it into parts. That's for the linguistics side of things. That's what's going on. I think that there are other equivalents in other labs, but the research is not stopping with COVID. The research goes on, and that's a great question.
Hi, I have a question. I'm a first-year student, and this is my first term. And I was just wondering, since I don't have really connections with any professors yet, how would I go about getting that started? Or, should I wait until I have better connections, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and a lot of people feel that way, especially in the coronavirus times. I suggest starting with professors that you've taken classes with, if someone resonates with you, and if you like the material, go ahead and talk to them, go to their office hours. And if nobody's popping out to you in your classes yet, I would say do some investigative Googling and go talk to our peer mentors. They have a lot of ways to get involved and make connections with professors and get plugged into research opportunities. And I think that's totally normal to feel like you don't have a super strong connection with any professors yet. And it'll come with time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's not really a question in itself, but I just wanted to know a little bit more about the type of research that you've done. Yes, kind of like Julissa.
Oh yeah. So I I'll go through the list of questions that I asked you, Alyssa. The first task that I did in the lab, I did subject running. Subject running is in psychology and linguistics. Generally, you work with human subjects, and it's not like we're doing mad experiments on your brain. It's that we want to understand how your brain processes language and other things. And so what you do with subject running, it was my first task in the non-coronavirus times. There's a physical lab space that has computers and recording equipment and all sorts of stuff. And subjects sign up to participate in the experiment. And the participant comes to the lab, and there's a consent form for them to sign. You explain what they're consenting to participate in the experiment. You explain to them what the task will be about. And then you administer the experiment by setting up the computer and making sure that participation goes smoothly. And when they're done participating, you debrief them, which means that you make sure that they know what the study was about and that they leave understanding everything. And that's a really central part of, I think, psychology and linguistics lab, because our data does come from people. And my lab meetings are virtual, and I think we talked about it a little bit already. A lot of presentations from grad students and things like that. A lot of feedback from the lab. And the community in my lab is just fantastic. I have had so much help from grad students with learning to do data analysis, learning to run subjects, and they were so helpful when I went to do my thesis experiment with how to code things up and how to design my experiment and answering all my questions and things like that. And now that I know enough in the lab, so new graduate students and RAs are coming to me with questions, and so that's been really great, the community and everything. And in terms of something that I liked that I didn't expect to like, I did my thesis experiment over the summer, my first round of it, and designing the experiment, figuring out what the participant is actually going to do and then participating in the experiment was something that I really loved doing, that I didn't expect to love doing, because it was kind of this creative process, and that was really great. And I've done a lot of acoustic analysis and data analysis, which is acoustic analysis is when you listen to speech and you break it into parts and take measurements and the frequency and the sounds and things like that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions you guys have? And real quickly, I am going to put the information for the upcoming workshops we have and the PDF in the chat. So for those of you who need to duck out, you still have that. Thank you guys so much for coming. Are there other questions that you have? If not, that's fine. And thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and ASURE really appreciates it. If you do have other questions, go see the peer mentors. They're fantastic, and they can help you with whatever you need, questions big and small. I also want to mention we're having an upcoming coffee hour with ASURE, and there's more information about that on our website. And that'll be where you kind of talk to professors and get to know their students and things like that. And we have a workshop coming up week 8 on resumes and cover letters. There's a link to that in the chat here. And I'm going to stick around for a few minutes in case you guys want to ask questions in a smaller group. And if not, thank you guys so much for coming. I really enjoyed this.